They say, geniuses are born in light, but most of them are shaped in darkness. And before Elon Musk became the man who wants to colonize Mars, there was a child growing up in a house full of silence, fear, and control. Today, we're not talking about SpaceX rockets or Tesla cars. We're going back to the beginning, to a place called Pretoria, South Africa, in the 1970s. This is the story of a boy who found his escape, not in the world around him, but in the worlds he discovered in books and, later, in the flickering green text of a computer screen. Elon's parents, May and Errol Musk, divorced when he was just 9 years old. It was a decision that would ripple through the rest of his life. For reasons he himself finds hard to explain today, Elon and his younger brother, Kimball, chose to live with their father. Looking back, Elon has described this as not a good idea. Life with Errol Musk was anything but ordinary. Errol was a brilliant engineer, a man with a high IQ. But he was also, in Elon's own words, a terrible human being. The atmosphere in the house was tense, filled with a kind of psychological pressure that's hard to imagine. Errol demanded perfection and had a temper that could erupt without warning. The boys learned to tread carefully, to stay out of the way, to make themselves small. It was a home where silence was safer than speaking, and where love felt conditional. School wasn't much of a refuge either. Elon was a small, quiet, and bookish kid. He wasn't interested in sports. He was interested in how things worked. He would lose himself in books for hours, devouring everything from science fiction to the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. His mind was always somewhere else, in a world of rockets and faraway galaxies. This made him an easy target. At school, he was relentlessly bullied. It wasn't just teasing. It was brutal physical violence. He was thrown downstairs, beaten until he blacked out. The scars weren't just physical. They were deep emotional wounds that taught him a harsh lesson about human nature. So, where does a lonely boy, living in a difficult home and bullied at school, find his solace? For Elon, it came in the form of a Commodore VIC-20. It was one of the first personal computers. And for a 10-year-old Elon, it was a gateway to another universe. While other kids were outside playing, he was inside teaching himself how to code. He got a book on the basic programming language and, in just 3 days, learned what was supposed to take 6 months. He wasn't just learning, he was creating. At the age of 12, he created his first video game, a space shooter called Blaster. It was a simple game by today's standards, but for a boy in the early 80s, it was an incredible achievement. He sold the code to a computer magazine for $500. It was more than just pocket money. It was the first proof that his ideas, the things he built inside his own mind, had value in the real world. It was a spark of light in a world that often felt very dark. The computer became his sanctuary. It was a world he could control, a world that made sense. Unlike the unpredictable emotions of the people around him, code followed rules. It was logical. If you typed the right commands, you got the right results. In this digital realm, he wasn't the small, bullied kid. He was a creator, a builder, a god of his own small universe. This was where the foundation for everything to come was laid. This was where he learned the problem-solving skills and the relentless work ethic that would later define him. The bullying and the difficult home life forged a powerful drive in him. It wasn't just a desire to succeed. It was a desperate need to escape. He saw his future not in South Africa, a country under the shadow of apartheid, but in America. He called it the land of opportunity, the place where anything was possible. Something out of the science fiction novels he read as a boy. And it's easy to see that as the product of genius alone. But the truth is more complex. The man who wants to build cities on Mars was first a boy who needed to build a safe space in his own mind. The innovator who revolutionized electric cars and private spaceflight was first a kid who found solace in the logic of computer code. His incredible drive to change the world is deeply connected to his early need to escape it. The darkness of his childhood didn't break him. It forged him. It gave him the armor he would need to take on impossible challenges and the unwavering belief that, with enough logic and willpower, any problem can be solved. The story of Elon Musk isn't just about a brilliant mind. It's a powerful testament to how our deepest struggles can become our greatest strengths. To understand Elon Musk, you can't just look at his rockets, his cars, or his tweets. You have to go back, way back, to a place and a time that forged him in fire. It was a nation torn apart, a society built on division and violence. But for young Elon Musk, the most terrifying world wasn't on the streets, outside. It was inside his own home. His father, Elon Musk, was by all accounts a brilliant man, a gifted engineer, a successful property developer. He was wealthy, intelligent, and charismatic. To the outside world, the Musks had it all. But behind closed doors, a different reality unfolded. According to Elon, his brother Kimball, his sister Tosca, and his mother May, Elon Musk was a tyrant, a man described as emotionally abusive, controlling, and terrifying to live with. Elon would later say that his father was a terrible human being who had a meticulously crafted evil plan. He described his childhood as pure psychological torture. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't just a strict dad or a few bad arguments. This was a constant, inescapable atmosphere of fear. In one interview, Elon recalled, "You don't know what it's like. It's not a happy situation. He's good at making life miserable." Imagine being a child, a bookish, awkward kid who loved science fiction and dreaming of other worlds. And the one place you're supposed to feel safe is the very source of your deepest anxieties. There was no escape. The psychological warfare was relentless. Elon would allegedly lecture his children for hours on end, berating them, breaking them down. Elon said he would have a monologue for 4 hours, and you're not allowed to leave. You have to sit there and listen to him for 4 hours. This wasn't just happening to Elon. His brother Kimball and sister Tosca experienced it too. Their mother, May Musk, a successful model and dietitian, eventually managed to escape the marriage. But the damage was done. When his parents divorced, Elon, then just 9 years old, made a fateful decision. Feeling sorry for his seemingly lonely father, he chose to live with him. He would later call this the biggest mistake of his life. The years that followed were a descent into what he described as misery. On top of the psychological abuse at home, school was another battlefield. Elon was small for his age and a total nerd. He was a prime target for bullies. He didn't just get teased, he got beaten. In one horrific incident, a group of boys threw him down a flight of concrete stairs and kicked him until he blacked out. He was hospitalized for a week. The physical scars eventually healed, but the combination of torment at school and torment at home created a pressure cooker. How does a kid survive that? For Elon, the answer was in books and computers. He retreated into the worlds of science fiction and fantasy. He read The Lord of the Rings and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy over and over and these weren't just stories. They were escape hatches. They offered him a vision of a different reality, one where heroes faced impossible odds and, through intelligence and determination, could change the world. Then, he discovered computers. At age 10, he got his first computer, a Commodore VIC-20. He devoured the programming manual that came with it, a manual meant to take 6 months to complete. Elon finished it in 3 days. By age 12, he had programmed his own video game called Blastar, a space shooter game. He sold the code to a magazine for $500. It was his first taste of turning an idea into reality, and into money. This wasn't just a hobby. It was the beginning of everything. It was a way to build a world he could control, a world that made sense. Unlike the chaotic, frightening world he lived in, this intense focus, this ability to lose himself in a problem, became his superpower. It was a coping mechanism forged in the crucible of his childhood. When the world around you is unbearable, you learn to create your own. You learn to focus with an intensity that borders on obsession, because the alternative is to be consumed by the darkness. This is a pattern we see throughout his life. When faced with an insurmountable problem, he doesn't back down. He works 100-hour weeks. He sleeps on the factory floor. He pushes himself and everyone around him to the absolute limit. Many people look at Elon Musk and see arrogance, a reckless disregard for norms. But when you understand his childhood, you start to see something else. You see a man who learned from a very young age that the world is a hostile place, that you can't rely on anyone but yourself, and that the only way to survive is to be smarter, tougher, and more relentless than everyone else. He wasn't taught to collaborate. He was taught to fight. He wasn't nurtured. He was tested. The decision to leave South Africa was a desperate act of self-preservation. At 17, just before he would have been conscripted into the South African military to enforce apartheid, the system he despised, he made his move. With very little money and no real plan, he left for Canada, his mother's birthplace. He was escaping his father, escaping the military, escaping a future he couldn't bear to imagine. He arrived in North America and enrolled at Queen's University in Ontario, and later transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. He was finally free from his father's direct control. But the psychological imprints remained. He carried with him an incredible tolerance for risk. Because what's the risk of a startup failing, compared to the daily psychological torment he had endured? He carried a relentless drive to succeed, because success was the ultimate form of escape, the ultimate way to build a fortress so high that no one could ever hurt him again. His first major success, Zip2, a company he started with his brother Kimball, was sold for over $300 million. Elon's share was $22 million. He was 28 years old. Most people would have retired. But for Elon, the money was never the main goal. The money was a tool to build bigger, more audacious things, a tool to pursue the grand visions inspired by his childhood science fiction books. Next came XCOM, which would eventually merge with another company to become PayPal. When eBay bought PayPal, Elon's stake was over $150 million. Again, he didn't stop. He rolled almost all of it into his next ventures. Ventures everyone told him were insane. SpaceX and Tesla. Think about the audacity. In the early 2000s, he decided to start a private rocket company to compete with giants like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and entire nations like Russia and China. Everyone, including his heroes like Neil Armstrong, told him he would fail. His first 3 rocket launches exploded. He was on the brink of complete financial ruin. But he didn't quit. Why? Because failure, to him, wasn't just losing money. It was returning to that feeling of powerlessness he knew as a child, and he would do anything to avoid that. On the 4th try, SpaceX's Falcon 1 successfully reached orbit, and the company was saved by a last-minute NASA contract. It was the same story with Tesla. He joined an electric car company when the entire automotive industry was laughing at the idea. Tesla faced bankruptcy, production hell, and endless skepticism. Musk famously slept on the factory floor, pushing his team and himself to the breaking point to meet production goals for the Model 3. This isn't normal CEO behavior. It's the behavior of a man who believes that sheer force of will can bend reality, a belief born from a childhood where his will was the only thing he truly owned. When you look at his grand ambitions colonizing Mars, transitioning the world to sustainable energy, creating brain-computer interfaces, they can seem like the fantasies of a man with too much money, but they can also be seen as the ultimate escape plan. If Earth is a fragile, often brutal place, why not build a backup? If humanity is trapped by its own limitations, why not break free? He's not just trying to build companies. He's trying to rewrite the rules of the game, to build a world that's safer, better, and more exciting than the one he was born into. His public persona, the trolling on Twitter, the impulsive decisions, it all starts to make a strange kind of sense. It's the behavior of someone who never learned to trust systems or authorities, because the primary authority in his life was a source of pain. He trusts his own intellect and his own instincts above all else, for better or for worse. He fights his battles in public, because he learned to fight alone. This is not an excuse for his controversial actions, or a justification for his flaws. It's an explanation. The story of Elon Musk is a powerful and cautionary tale. It shows how the deepest wounds of our childhood can become the engines of our greatest ambitions. The boy who felt trapped in a house of psychological horror is now the man trying to build an escape hatch for all of humanity. The lonely kid who found solace in books about space is now the man building the rockets to take us there. The shadow of his father, Elon Musk, still looms large. Despite the immense success, the pain is clearly still there. It's a stark reminder that you can fly to the stars, but you can never fully escape the gravity of your past. The darkness he experienced didn't break him. It forged him into one of the most powerful and complicated figures of our time. When Elon Musk's parents divorced, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He chose to live with his father, Elon Musk. This wasn't a choice for safety or comfort. For a young, intellectually hungry Elon, it was a choice for a powerful mind. His father was a brilliant engineer, and Elon was drawn to that intellect like a moth to a flame. But that house, which promised intellectual stimulation, became his first prison. Years later, Elon would look back on this time with chilling clarity, stating, "My father was a terrible human being." Strong words. Words that carry the weight of a painful childhood. What could have happened in that house to make a son speak of his father in such a way? This is the story of how a boyish admiration for a brilliant mind turned into a desperate escape from a psychological tormentor. Elon was born in Pretoria, South Africa, a place deeply divided by apartheid. From a young age, he was different. He was an awkward, introverted boy who was more comfortable with books than with people. He would often get lost in his own world, staring into space for so long that his parents once had him tested for deafness. They called it blanking out, but really, it was Elon's mind at work, visualizing inventions and new worlds. This intense internal focus made him a prime target for bullies. He was the smallest kid in his class, and his bookish nature made him an easy victim. He was relentlessly tormented, beaten, and ostracized. One particularly brutal attack left him hospitalized after he was thrown down a flight of concrete stairs. The physical scars eventually healed, but the emotional ones ran deep. School was a battlefield, and home was supposed to be a sanctuary. But after the divorce, his new home presented a different kind of danger. When his parents split, his mother, May, gained custody of the children. But Elon, at just 9 years old, felt sorry for his father, who seemed lonely. He also saw his father as the smartest person he knew. So, he made the fateful choice to live with Errol, and his younger brother Kimball soon followed. Initially, things seemed exciting. His father, a wealthy engineer, owned a large house and had a passion for adventure. They traveled the world, flew in his private plane, and even owned an emerald mine. It was a life of privilege and intellectual challenge. Errol pushed his sons, teaching them about engineering, construction, and how the world worked. For Elon, this was thrilling. He was finally with someone who could match his intellectual curiosity. But beneath this glittering surface of wealth and adventure, a dark undercurrent was growing stronger. Elon Musk was a man of contradictions. He was charismatic and brilliant, but also, according to his family, deeply manipulative and cruel. Elon described life with him as mental torture. He said his father was brilliant at making any situation, no matter how good, terrible. He was a master of psychological warfare. Elon has said his father knew exactly how to cut him down, how to find his weaknesses and exploit them. Imagine being a young boy, seeking approval from the person you admire most, only to be met with constant criticism and emotional games. This wasn't just tough love. Elon has described it as pure evil. He would spend his childhood trying to navigate his father's unpredictable moods, never knowing what might set him off. The intellectual paradise he had imagined turned into a psychological cage, built by the very man he once idolized. The stories from this period are disturbing. Elon has said that his father was involved in violent and questionable activities. Errol himself has admitted to shooting and killing 3 intruders who broke into his home, although he was cleared on grounds of self-defense. The environment was chaotic and often dangerous. For Elon and Kimball, the only way to survive was to escape. This escape wasn't just about leaving a house. It was about saving their own minds and futures. Elon poured all his energy into his passions, computers and technology. At just 12 years old, he programmed his own video game called Blaster and sold the code to a magazine for $500. It was his first taste of turning an idea into reality and, more importantly, into a potential ticket out. He saw technology not just as a hobby, but as a lifeline to a different world, a world far away from his father's influence. The dream of America became his obsession. He read about the land of opportunity, a place where innovators and dreamers could build new things, a place where your past didn't have to define your future. It represented everything his life in South Africa was not. When he was 17, against his father's wishes, he made his move. He knew if he waited, he'd be conscripted into the South African military, which was enforcing apartheid at the time, something he was vehemently against. He said, "I don't have an issue with serving in the military, but serving in the South African army suppressing black people just didn't seem like a good way to spend your time." So, using his mother's Canadian citizenship, he left. He arrived in Canada with just a backpack and a few $1,000s, severing ties with his father. It was a terrifying leap into the unknown, but for Elon, the risk of staying was far greater than the risk of leaving. This escape marked a turning point. It was the moment Elon Musk took control of his own narrative. The years of psychological hardship had forged in him an incredible resilience and an almost obsessive drive to succeed. He worked odd jobs, from cleaning out boiler rooms to logging, just to get by, while studying at Queen's University. He eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, finally reaching the land of his dreams. He often speaks about how his difficult childhood prepared him for the brutal world of entrepreneurship. He learned how to endure immense pressure and how to push through seemingly impossible challenges. The psychological battles he fought at home taught him a kind of mental toughness that few possess. When you've survived what he describes as evil, the challenges of starting a business like PayPal, Tesla, or SpaceX might seem manageable in comparison. Today, the relationship between Elon and his father remains fractured. For years, they were estranged. While there have been occasional attempts at reconciliation, the deep wounds have never fully healed. In a revealing Rolling Stone interview, Elon broke down in tears when talking about his father, a rare display of vulnerability from the usually stoic billionaire. He confessed, "He was such a terrible human being. You have no idea." He went on to list his father's alleged misdeeds, painting a picture of a man who was not just a bad father, but a malevolent force in his life. He concluded the thought by saying, "My dad will have a carefully thought out evil plan. He will plan evil." These are not words spoken lightly. They are the testament of a son who feels he survived his own father. So when we look at Elon Musk, the visionary, the workaholic, the controversial figure who wants to save humanity by colonizing Mars, we are also looking at a man who is still running from the ghosts of his past. His relentless drive to build, to create, and to push humanity forward can be seen as a way to build a better world than the one he grew up in. It's a quest for control, for safety, and for a future that is the polar opposite of his painful beginnings. The boy who chose the monster didn't just escape the prison. He dedicated his life to building rockets to fly as far away from it as possible. The story of Elon Musk isn't just about genius and ambition. It's a profound story about survival and how the deepest pains of our childhood can shape our greatest destinies. For young Elon, this was reality. He was bullied relentlessly. It wasn't just teasing or name-calling. It was physical, brutal. One attack was so severe, it put him in the hospital. He was thrown down a flight of stairs and beaten until he lost consciousness. Think about that for a second. The place where you're supposed to learn and feel safe becomes a source of terror. So you'd think home would be a refuge, right? A place to find comfort and support. But for Elon, that wasn't the case either. His home life was complicated and offered little solace from the turmoil at school. So, with no safe harbor in the outside world, where does a child go? He goes inward. He escapes into the vast, limitless world inside his own head. This is where the story really begins. Elon's escape wasn't into fantasy in the way you might think. It was into books. He devoured them. Science fiction, encyclopedias, anything he could get his hands on. He famously read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica and then moved on to others. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline. It was a world where knowledge was power, where rules were logical, and where he could be in control. And then came the next frontier: computers. In the early days of personal computing, a young Elon got his hands on a Commodore VIC-20. While most kids were playing games, he was learning to create them. He taught himself to code. At just 12 years old, he programmed his own video game called Blastar and sold the code to a magazine for $500. This wasn't just a kid playing around. It was the first sign of a mind that saw technology not just as a tool, but as a medium for creation, a way to build new realities. This intense focus on books, code, and logic had a profound effect. When the world outside is chaotic and painful, a world governed by clear, predictable rules becomes incredibly appealing. In the world of programming, if something doesn't work, there's a logical reason. You can debug it, fix it, and make it work. It's a stark contrast to the messy, unpredictable, and often cruel world of human emotions and social interactions. This is the crucible where Elon's mindset was forged. It's where a deep-seated obsession with problem-solving took root. The pain of his early years didn't break him. It channeled his focus. Emotions, which had brought nothing but hurt, were subconsciously pushed aside. Logic, systems, and engineering became the framework through which he saw everything. It wasn't about ignoring feelings, but about prioritizing a different way of thinking. A way that could build rockets, create electric cars, and connect brains to computers. So when you look at Elon Musk today, the relentless drive, the audacious goals, the sometimes awkward public persona, it's important to remember the boy who had to build his own world to survive. A world built not of flesh and bone, but of logic, code, and the unyielding power of the human mind under pressure. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest strengths are born from our deepest struggles. Picture the world's richest man. What do you see? A sprawling mansion with 100 rooms. A private island, maybe a dark, Gothic castle perched on a cliffside, straight out of a comic book. That's what we expect, right? A billionaire's palace. But with Elon Musk, the reality is far stranger, far more human. Here's the thing that gets me. Despite his immense wealth, Elon Musk doesn't have a home. Not in the way you and I think of one. He sold them. Almost all of them. The grand estates. The beautiful properties across California gone. Today, the man who wants to build cities on Mars lives in a house that is smaller than your average two-car garage. It's a tiny, foldable, prefabricated box. A simple little unit near the SpaceX starbase in Texas, where he can be close to his rockets. It's almost like he's running from something. Running from walls that hold too many memories. From spaces that feel too permanent. Think about it. Our home is where we build our lives. Where we put down roots. It's our anchor. But Musk seems to have cut his ties. He's a man without an anchor, floating between Earth and his dreams of space. Why would he do this? He claims it's about focus. He says selling his physical possessions frees him up to dedicate everything to his mission for humanity. No distractions, no attachments, just the relentless pursuit of colonizing Mars. And on one level, that makes sense. It fits the narrative of the genius inventor, sacrificing personal comfort for a greater cause. It's noble. It's inspiring. But is that the whole story? I can't help but wonder if there's something deeper going on. Maybe it's not just about focus. Maybe it's about control. A mansion is a fixed point. It ties you to a place, to a certain life. But a tiny, portable house, you can pick it up and move it whenever you want. There's a kind of freedom in that, but also a kind of loneliness. Imagine having all the money in the world, the power to shape the future, but choosing to live in a space so small, so temporary. It's a paradox. He builds rockets that touch the heavens, but his own feet barely touch the ground. He's a digital nomad on a planetary scale. His true home isn't a building made of wood and steel. It's an idea. An idea of the future, an idea of Mars. Perhaps he feels more at home in the vast emptiness of space than in a grand, empty house. When you're constantly looking up at the stars, maybe the ground beneath your feet starts to feel less important. Maybe the concept of home becomes less about a place and more about a purpose. He doesn't need roots because his vision is his foundation. This choice challenges our own ideas about success and happiness. We are taught to strive for bigger houses, nicer cars, more stuff. We see wealth as a means to acquire comfort and luxury. But here is Musk, with more wealth than anyone in history, rejecting all of it. He is living like a student in a dorm room, all while running companies that are changing the world. It makes you question everything. What is a home, really? Is it the four walls around you, or the mission that drives you? Is it about putting down roots, or is it about having the freedom to fly? For Elon Musk, it seems the answer is clear. He is a man with no mansion, no roots, and perhaps no earthly home. He's already living on Mars, in his mind, and his little box of a house is just a temporary docking station until his real journey begins.